Hello, welcome to episode 19 of the series on Introduction to Programming. Strings are a large topic. In this video, we will see how you can modify them in JavaScript. Let's take a look. One of the most common ways that you will modify strings is by combining them with other strings. So for example, we have a simple hello world statement here. I very easily could combine these two strings together to form a single one. If I run this, nothing new will happen. But this is actually the equivalent of calling a method called concat on a string value. And so when I do this, you're going to see hello world printed out twice. These are two of the exact same operation. Whenever JavaScript sees this plus operator between two strings, it basically ends up calling the concatenate method on the previous string to create a new one, which just combines both of them together. And of course, you can chain concatenations. So I can do that. Of course, you can also chain the addition operator. And so what you'll get is a longer string with all the pieces combined together into a single one. Now, that's probably the most common way you're going to modify them, but there are other times where you might want to have, say, a sequence here or some sort of phrase, and you want to repeat it. So one of the ways that we can modify this string is call the repeat method, which takes a number, and that says how many times would I like to repeat this string and return it as a new value. So if I run this, it's going to return 30 numbers here. If I just say repeat once, it'll just return what you basically provided it, which is this string here. Will repeat itself once and just return itself. And so these are kind of the two more common ways that you're going to be manipulating strings. Another common operation we use in order to manipulate strings is a trim. And this is more common when you have, say, user input where they want to type in their name, but they might have a trailing space. And if I run this, you don't really notice that there's a trailing space here. But if I repeat this name, it'll become very clear that there is some sort of space character. And so one of the ways you can get rid of it is by calling the trim method on it. And what trim does is it basically says, hey, if you got any white space at the front of your back of your string, just get rid of it. And so now when I repeat this, there's no space between the values. You can also do like trim start, which in this case won't do anything because the space is at the end. And I can also do trim in. Right. And so, just to make it clear, if I do this and I do trim start and then do trim, what we'll see is these first two cases, you'll still see the white space because there's still a space here. Obviously, if I just delete the spaces here, they'll just say name to name with no spaces between, because each of these methods will end up trimming off the white space that is surrounding the actual word we care about. So the opposite of trim is to pad. And so in this case, there are two types of padding we can do. We can pad the end, and we can pad start. There is no operation to pad both, and that wouldn't really make sense because when you indicate the pad, the first number is how many characters do you want visible? And then you're going to say, if there are no characters, what do you want me to pad with? Same thing with pad start. Right. And so there's not really a convenient way to do both. I mean, I can think of a few in my head that I might want to try, but that doesn't really make sense here. And I don't need this. So if I run these two, you'll see that our pad end will add on 5 zeros after the space because it's trying to fill up this string until it fits 10 individual characters. Right? Each character is just this part of the string. And of course, we do it 3 times because we have a repeat 3. On the flip side, when we pad start, what you'll see is the numbers go before the space and the name, and then it repeats that 3 times. Right. So padding is a good and easy way to say, hey, I want something to be a certain length. And if it isn't a certain length, I want you to add characters to make it happen. Right. You might add white space in this case. Although when I do this, you won't see it because when you render to a web page by default, it actually collapses all the white space together into a single one. But if I put like a character here, then you can actually see where the padding is happening. Another common way to make changes to a string is to take an existing value and replace some of the characters within it. We can do this by calling the replace method on our string. So for example, if I want to change world to say earth, I can simply call the replace method on my string and it'll run and replace it with hello earth. If I had the word world twice in here, it's only going to replace the first occurrence. If I want to replace all occurrences, I can use the replace all method, which will mean every time I encounter the word world, I want to replace it with the word earth. And so this can be a very convenient way to make changes to an existing piece of text that you get. Right? For example, say every time I see a single space, I want to replace it with a space, a comma, right? Or I guess a comma and a space probably would make more sense, but same idea, right? It allows you to easily make changes to an existing piece of text without having to modify the original text, right? If you're given this value from somewhere else, you wouldn't be able to add the commas in, so you could just simply call the replace method or the replace all to make the changes that you would like. Previously, I looked at how you can turn a string into an array so that you can look over and iterate through each of the characters within it. Now, there are a few more ways that we can manipulate a string without actually using it as an array. For example, we can call a char@at method, which allows us to extract out the individual characters that we wish to pull out of our string. There additionally is something called the char code@. This one is roughly the same idea, just instead of returning the actual character, it returns the numeric value of that character. In addition to the typical array access, for example, if I do this, it'll return the age. We can also use the at method on our string. Again, this will also return h, right? If I do the next value, it'll give me the e. If I do the couple down the road, I'll get the L. If I put in a negative value, it'll do something kind of interesting for us, which is it'll grab the value starting at the end, counting down from the end. So if I do 4, for example, it'll give us the R, right? Because it's looking at the end of the string here and going down until it gets to the value at the end. If you use the array syntax, this guy will just result in an error. It just doesn't do anything really. Whereas the at operator allows you to access things in a little bit more helpful of a way, right? Being able to grab a value from the end can be useful if you want to know what the last few characters, right? You might use a negative value here to grab those quickly. Grabbing individual characters can be useful, but often you want to grab parts of the string that you are working with. So split is probably one of the more common ones you're going to use, where you basically say, oh, I want to split on every single space within my word. And so what it's doing is it's returning an array value here. It doesn't look as clear because realistically, it is trying to display an array of strings. It looks very closely like this would, right? If I run this, it'll do the same thing. If I put 2 spaces in here, it'll actually put the space as its own value, because basically every time it sees the character, it splits it up and creates a new array value for each time it does the split. If I do a split on a double, It gets rid of that because it's only going to look for this guy. And then again, if I stick a single space in here, it won't actually split it out. It'll just keep it as a single value. Another way to split up a string is to use the slice method. The slice method takes an index and ending index and will grab all the characters in between these two values. So if I run this, you're going to see it grab this part of the string starting at the third index and going all the way to the eighth index and then pulling out that piece of string. Similar to slice, there is also a method we can use called substring. And the way that substring works is basically does the same thing as slice. However, if you flip the two values that you insert, it'll do the exact same thing, which can be convenient, but it can also be surprising, especially if you are expecting it to behave the same way as slice. If I use slice like this, it will do absolutely nothing. Whereas if I do substring here, it will work. Whereas if I flip this around, substring will do what we expect, and slice will do the exact same thing. Generally speaking, you'll probably use substring, but not necessarily. There is another one where you can use substir. This stands for substring as well, but the difference here is it's basically saying, starting at this index, grab me the next three characters, right? So if I start at 0, it's going to do the same thing. But if I start at 1, it'll grab the next three. This guy is probably going to be the most convenient because often you know how much you want to extract versus grabbing specific indexes. But depends on your situation. Another operation you'll probably do when trying to modify strings is changing the casing of strings. Obviously, this is more specific to English. Depending on what locales you're working with, this may not be appropriate. But when you're working with English languages, you can use 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase, which will effectively change the case of the characters in your string. So for example, if I change this to uppercase and run it, everything will be uppercase. This can be helpful in some circumstances when you want to force the case in a certain direction. For example, comparing strings of different cases could be helpful to turn them both into lowercase or uppercase before performing a comparison. Strings are a common data type. Modifying them to display them in different ways is helpful. In future videos, we will explore how to check them for various conditions to help make decisions about when to modify or display them. Have a good day.